So all of a sudden, strength becomes balance when you don't have it. Strength becomes speed when you don't have it. If you can't squat 45 pounds, or if you can't squat a 15-pound bar, odds are you can't actually get up from a seated position without using your hands. We've met people who end up in this position. This has happened over years, and they don't even realize that they've kind of worked around that deficiency. And when you're 70 is not the time to realize that. We want to get people when they're 30, when they're 40, to never get to that point.
Hey guys and girls, and welcome to this week's episode of the Breaking Muscle Podcast, where we digest the latest science to give you actionable insights that will improve your training and performance. I am Pete Hitzeman, the managing editor at BreakingMuscle.com, and your host for today's show. What are the stories you've always told yourself about your body? If you're like most people, you either believe you were born strong or you weren't. The role of genetics in body type, physical capacity, and longevity has been emphasized for so long in the scientific literature and pop culture alike that a whole lot of people have subconsciously resigned themselves to what they believe is their fate. But CJ Gotcher never bought into any of that. After he discovered weight training through his experience with CrossFit at the Naval Academy, he embarked on a mission to find out just how strong he could make his 165-pound frame. His exploration of his own performance potential eventually led him to Mark Rippetoe's starting strength system, and CJ fell in love. He sat down with me to explore some of the ideas he recently presented in a talk at the Starting Strength Coaches Conference, including what the interference effect is and how to mitigate it in your training. We also cover how people mangle the idea of sport-specific training and why strength is your best defense against the effects of aging. I know I say it every week, but if you're enjoying the show, we'd really love it if you helped us get the word out. Share this episode with your friends, and make sure you stop by our page on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, and leave us a rating and a review. The more you do that, the more listeners we get, which makes it easier to land interviews with the kind of guests you've come to expect on Breaking Muscle. Finally, if you have any input or feedback for the show, pass it along to editorial@breakingmuscle.com. Joining us today on the Breaking Muscle Podcast is our own CJ Gotcher. He is an officer in the Navy Reserve and holds a smattering of barbell-centric certifications from Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, USA Weightlifting Sports Performance Coach, CrossFit Level 1, Precision Nutrition Level 1, and, crucially, Starting Strength Coach. He's a competitive powerlifter out of Ironmonger's Gym in beautiful Vista, California, and he's sitting down to us today to help us debunk some bro science, demystify the actual science, and find out how to turn regular people into freakishly strong people, one squat at a time. CJ, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you, Pete. It's a pleasure.
So I found out only hours ago, and this completely reorganized my thoughts on this podcast, that you and I, besides a military background, also share a history in swing dancing?
Yeah, that's definitely a thing.
Yeah, so you were at the Naval Academy, and you were on this underground swing dance team. How did this happen?
So while you're at the Naval Academy, there have always been mandatory dances. I don't even know how long these have been going. These probably date back to early 1900s. Who knows? But a group of us just started running our own thing. It was hosted by one of my friends, Ryan Hall. He was our teacher and kind of our group leader. And then this thing just kind of snowballed. I mean, you're all 4,000 kids in one big dorm, Bancroft Hall. So you all pass, you all know each other. The contact is very close. Next thing you know, we're getting 10 people on a Friday just doing swing in the hall, then 20, then 30. At one point, we got up to 60 people. So when you have that kind of mass and people coming from outside of the school to participate, and it started going to events, weekends. The video that I posted was a part of the International Ball. It's a kind of a formal event the Naval Academy hosts. So we ran the routine for that. It became a pretty big thing. There were certain voices at the time who were not fond of it. It's almost like Footloose is almost what it felt like. It's a distraction from your military responsibilities. But for the most part, we just had a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So from throwing girls over your shoulder to today, 560-pound deadlift, which I was watching just before we came online. How did you make the transition into barbell strength after you're at the academy?
So while I was at the academy, I was introduced to CrossFit, which was my initial introduction to strength training and barbells to begin with. Through high school, I had been a cross country runner, and was familiar with obstacle course races, with things like that, just as that was starting to come up. And then at the Naval Academy, this whole CrossFit thing took off. 2006, the what is CrossFit, the charter became popular. And I went full bore into that. Went on for about 4 years of consistent main site WOD programming as best I could within the Naval Academy construct, and made improvements, especially improvements in familiarity with the lifts, and then ended up kind of hitting a plateau in the sense of my strength lifts. I was trying to go SEALs at the time, so trying to transfer into Naval Special Warfare. So there were certain skill sets that in the initial test, the initial PST, that I just wasn't good enough at. So I kind of shifted away from CrossFit to focus on those, to train for the test. Swimming, running, to focus on those elements. After a couple things happened, just, life, the universe, and everything, a couple years into that process, it didn't seem feasible anymore, and I dropped that. And so I was sitting at 165 pounds body weight, still deadlifting 350 pounds. And I used to think that was really impressive, a twice body weight deadlift. And I was kind of tired of being the fastest weak guy in the room. In terms of the people who I associated with, there were people like Eric Bleckenberg at the old gym who was coaching there at the time. People who were strong, who moved a lot of weight, and who were not, the stereotype that gets carried sometimes that, oh, you become a weightlifter, and there's the two extremes. There's the guy who waddles his way to the glass, to the door at the front of the gym and can't walk upstairs. And I recognized very quickly that wasn't the case. So I decided, I'm going to take this strength thing seriously. Did kind of a smattering of programs. Everyone kind of starts doing their, kind of just figuring things out. And I was actually in Afghanistan after coming off a 5-3-1 cycle, again, just figuring things out. And I remembered this whole starting strength thing. I had remembered Mark Rippetoe's association with CrossFit back in the early days when he was running seminars through CrossFit, and I was like, let's retouch on that book, see if there's anything interesting on it. And I was kind of blown away. This was the third edition now, the new edition of the book since I had read it the last time. Blown away by the content, the material. I just kept rereading it, trying to implement it, trying to do it out in Afghanistan. Came back to the States. I'm like, I'm going to do this thing. I felt like I knew the content, had been lifting weights for a long time, had been coaching in one form or another for a long time, attempted to get the credential in New York at a seminar there, and completely bombed.
Wow.
Yeah, it was because I had read the material, I'd been participating in the forums, I had been, knew a lot, that you can't, nobody can see me, I'm using quote fingers here right now. Right. Knew a lot, but there's the difference between having what you think is a knowledge of the training model, what you think is an understanding of how things work, vice making that translate and happen in real time with a lifter in front of you. And that was a skill that I just didn't have, and that was the very clear checkpoint. Like, you have to be able to do this. So I spent the next year and a half. It was like between a year and a half training anyone who would be my victim, peers at work, my wife, anyone who would let me take them through the teaching progressions, take them through the lifts, watching videos online and critiquing and applying strategies to learn how to reply in real time. Eventually got the professional certification, so I'm a starting strength coach. And between that and the CSCS began when I left the active duty, started coaching. At that time, I was taking powerlifting a little bit more seriously, so that became a regular event. I took up at CrossFit 760 because after the active duty, I was like, I need to coach. I need to get hands on more people in a professional capacity to go through the cycle of teach, observe, cue, see how the cue is taken, feed it back, and see progress in somebody in real time. So I was working CrossFit 760, had a great time, loved those people, and went to USPA Nationals last year as a powerlifter, and things have just been moving in that direction ever since.
That's not unlike my own path into barbell stuff and coaching stuff. I had a deployment in 2003, it would have been, and there was a powerlifting meet, if you can call it that, at the base that I was at. And I was working out, doing a lot like what you're talking about, just kind of moving stuff around and figuring out what things do. And my upper body's always been a disaster, but my legs have always been pretty strong. And they had a trap bar deadlift competition for reasons I don't know why trap bar, but I was super impressed with myself that I pulled 315 off the ground. Now that's kind of funny, but at the time, I probably weighed 160 pounds and I was super, super skinny. And so I was really pleased that I ugly pulled a trap bar 315 off the ground. But it kind of got me thinking about, well, what can I do to get stronger? And so ended up kind of delving further into different training modalities and cycling and running and quitting smoking and losing 60 pounds and doing all the things that I needed to do to kind of make my life better.
No kidding.
But ended up on the end of it, getting really into weightlifting and getting really into using strength to make your life better. Not necessarily strength as its own pursuit, but strength to make your performance better in other sports and in life in general, which is why when I saw you give a 45-minute spiel at the Starting Strength Coaches Conference on strength and cross-training and strength and endurance, I was enthralled. And that video needs to get a lot more traffic than it currently has, because you did a really good job, as you have always done with your content for Breaking Muscle, of taking all of the science, which there's a whole bunch, not as much as we like in some areas, but we'll touch on that in a second, all of the science, and creating some actionable intelligence off of it. So kind of run us through what you found out when you were looking at the interplay between strength training and endurance training.
So kind of as a context for that, the whole reason we got started off into that is because most of the people we coach, they're just general population looking for strength, blah, 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 but they have other interests. They want to run. Hey, I want to do a triathlon. I want to do this. I'm doing it for a sport. And so although what people classically think of as starting strength, the spreadsheet you see online and the Texas method and the programs are designed for the ideal lifter. We train and coach people who are not they're not the ideal lifter from a strength perspective. They've got their own goals. So in looking into the research, kind of my goal was to consolidate a couple of questions. Is there an interference effect was the biggest one that some people are still arguing today. I think the research on it is relatively clear. The interference effect was discovered is essentially that you cannot strength train and aerobic train at the same time and receive equal gains in both. There is some level of interference to which, even if you put the same volume of strength training with one person and then layer on aerobic training on top of that with another person, their strength gains will be diminished. Their strength gains will be inhibited. They won't gain as much strength. They may still get stronger. They won't gain as much strength as they would otherwise. So answering that question first was a big deal, and then going into what metrics actually matter for aerobic endurance. We spent a little bit of time on that. VO2 max tends to be the one that gets all the talk. But then which ones actually predict aerobic endurance performance? And then moving from there into what I thought was really the important part. So how do we optimize? If you've got somebody who wants to run, they are primarily a runner, but they want to strength train as an accessory to their running work. How can they do that without interfering with their aerobic sport? Because we've seen, study after study, research after research, anecdote after anecdote put out on the value of strength training. I mean, we're starting to see it, or for years actually, even back when I was doing obstacle course racing, Runner's World is already talking about, all the magazine, Triathlon is already talking about the value of cross training with barbell work, the value of cross training with strength training, even if they weren't talking about barbell work. So this has been in the culture, but there hasn't been a lot of communication, except from a couple of people. I hear it, Alex Viata, there's a couple of voices out there talking about how to optimize. We just want to know, what does the research say, and what is the quality of research on that topic? So then we ended up in that seminar.
I want to kind of dive into that, especially the interference effect, for a minute, because a lot of people use the interference effect as an excuse to not do the thing they don't want to do, right? So I'm not going to, I have a lot of runner friends and cyclist friends. I don't want to lift because it's going to make me too big and bulky, and then I will be heavier and won't be able to run as fast and bike as far. Vice versa, a lot of strength bros don't want to run because, I'm trying to get as strong as I can get, and running's going to interfere with that. I like to back out and say, you're not getting paid for this. So what you should probably be doing is looking at your longevity. So understanding that most people have goals in that trend in one direction or the other. How do people strike that balance and minimize the negative interference effect while still getting the positivity of both sides of that training?
So there's a couple of pieces to that. The classic model, if I had somebody and I could work with them, perfectly on this task, would be to do it sequentially. So I wouldn't do it at the same time. I would build strength first because the adaptations tend to retain. Muscle mass tends to retain well. Your experience under the barbell retains well if you're able to maintain consistent practice with it. And once the strength has been built to a certain level, it is a lot easier to maintain on 2 or even sometimes 1 session a week. 2 is usually more optimal, while you go and then devote the vast majority of your strength or your training volume on aerobic endurance work. That would be my ideal, and that is one strategy we bring up. You don't necessarily get rid of the interference effect over time, because ideally we would stretch these out infinitely. You could be the strongest lifter and then completely back off and be the fastest or longest runner, depending on how long you're willing to stretch those time scales. But at the very least, taking 3 months, 4 months, following a linear progression, getting as strong as you can without completely investing in that life, without going deep down in that direction enough that it's going to interfere with the other activities, and then shifting to aerobic endurance. Beyond that, though, we understand, and this is something we see routinely, either sports seasons that don't really stop, recreational seasons that don't stop, because people enjoy running their 5Ks and people enjoy running their marathons, and we understand that. So the next piece of that then was how to avoid interference. So we kind of took it from 2 directions. One is, what if your strength is your primary focus, but you need to do some conditioning on the side? For instance, if you are cutting weight, if you are a weight-dependent athlete, if you are a CrossFitter and you're in a biased phase in your training, so you're periodized biasing towards strength, but you just don't want to lose, all aerobic capacity, then when does that tipping point happen when I'm doing too much aerobic volume and it's really going to start tanking my strength performance? I felt like there was a good amount of research on that, and it matched pretty well with a lot of what we have seen as strength coaches anecdotally. So I felt pretty confident in our recommendations on that side. On the other hand, was for aerobic endurance athletes who wanted to focus on their aerobic endurance, but using strength to reinforce that. There wasn't necessarily as much research on that, at least that I could find, that we could find as a group, because by the time we got through it, I probably had collected about 70 or 80 different papers that I had read through, and there were a lot of abstracts skimmed. But between the 70 or 80 that were routinely referenced, and seemed most credible, there wasn't too much information on that. What we were able to dig up was more on the side of it almost felt like add in as much as you can before it interferes with your sport. It was very experimental, and the recommendations, because the bodies themselves tend to be very conservative, were start off small and build until you notice an interference with your aerobic endurance, and then parse it from there. So for our strength training athletes, we generally found up to 3 days a week, up to 30 minutes, moderate intensity, preferably non-eccentric work. So when you're talking about, powerlifters who are like, oh, running kills my powerlifting, well, between heavyweight athletes who running actually does just hurt. But also the eccentric component of running leaves you more sore, leaves you more tired, and the fatigue takes longer to dissipate. In the research that evaluated the effect of a single hard training bout on a cycle on subsequent strength and strength performance, there was a noted decrease in performance an hour after, 3 hours after, but by a day after, there wasn't a huge decrease in performance. There wasn't a statistically significant decrease in performance. So our recommendations then were to stay away from eccentric work. So focusing on things like the sled, things like the bike, even the rower, there's a little bit of a component to it, and there's definitely a soreness component to it, but the rower is not a bad tool. And other tools like that, prioritizing those and keeping the volume to 3 days a week and 30 minutes or less. And we actually found in the research, that was the point when the interference effect wasn't terribly noticeable. And in our experience working with athletes in those sports, that's where we find a tipping point where we have to stop. So we follow a linear progression. We're trying to get you to add weight to the bar every session for as long as you can, because keep it simple until you have to get complicated.
Mhm.
So we start noticing when people go over that line, a marked drop in how long that linear progression lasts before we have to shift them to more complicated programming because they just can't gain strength. So we start at least at that rate. We take a look at our progression the same as for an aerobic athlete. If they start doing so much strength work that they can't put in the miles on the road, it is going to inhibit the easy gains that come at the beginning of any couch to 5K program.
Mm-hmm.
So our intention there was just to find out how long we could keep you a novice, how long we could keep you easy gaining before we just start tanking that whole process.
And all of the things that you just talked about, extrapolating from the research, play in very well with the anecdotal things, like you mentioned, that we as coaches and athletes have found. I've been playing around with the idea of seasonal fitness for a long time, which is not fitness you go get at your local farmer's market. This is fitness that you...
Organic.
It's free range fitness, really.
God, that's got to be a gym somewhere.
It's the idea that you don't need to be in top 5K form 12 months a year. If you want to improve your 5K, you're going to have to spend some time developing other areas of your physical machine in order to improve that performance. One of the things I really took away from my USA Track and Field seminar, coaching cert seminar, was the idea that way too many people build the wrong physical capacity at the wrong point in the season. And this is famous for marathoners and for endurance cyclists, right? It's early in the season, it's February, and everybody's out there putting in base miles. But endurance is the thing that drops off the quickest, and strength is the thing, physiologically, we know from studying this over and over, it hangs out the longest. And speed is a component of strength in a lot of ways. So get fast, get strong first, and then layer the endurance on at the end. Now all of a sudden you have a strong season, which is what I do from November to about the end of February, and then you have a speed season, and then you have an endurance season, so that you get to your whatever your peak event is with the lingering effects of all of that strength and speed and the capacity to express that over a long period of time, rather than, well, I have to ride 60 miles every Saturday, or I have to run 30 miles or 40 miles a week every week, or I'm just not training hard enough. It's intelligent progression and developing the whole body, rather than just, well, I've got to lift 5 days a week, man, or I'm not going to be big. Well,
yeah. There's a mentality out there. It's almost like in video game parlance or something like that. Like you're collecting points towards strength. You're collecting points towards endurance. In starting strength, we think of it as the difference between exercise and training. When somebody goes to the gym and they want to get hot and sweaty for an hour, and that is better than gardening. And it is going to move you in that direction. And if you spend that hour getting hot and sweaty doing barbell stuff, then you will move more in the direction of strength. Or if you spend that hour getting hot and sweaty doing running stuff, you'll move more in the direction of endurance. So it's definitely moving you forward, but to actually get to higher end results, or to get to even intermediate results at a decently fast pace, at the fastest pace you can go, you want to train, you want to select the capabilities you want to build. You want to get to them as quickly as possible by introducing the correct amount of stress systematically over time. So it takes it from the casual, hey, I'm just going to go have fun, to programming and the challenges of programming. Mm-hmm. In the book Peak, Anders Ericsson, who's done extensive work on the study of the development of skills and mastery, he talks about it, the mountain. So and he describes general practice, just doing the thing. You just play the flute or you do whatever, and you just step in front of the music and you try. It's like wandering up the mountain. Eventually you might get better, but virtually everyone who wanders up a mountain finds a wall that they can't get past. Then to actually do purposeful practice, or in his case, he would argue an even higher step than that, what he would call deliberate practice, is to look at the whole mountain, to pick the best path, to pick the smoothest path, even if it is not the straightest one, even if it's not obvious, and take that one intentionally. So for runners, the straightest path appears to be run more. And there is certainly a degree to which, if you want to get better at running, run more. But there are capacities that we look at in the literature that are supported, and the evidence for why is, there's so many different mechanisms proposed, but that strength training supports endurance training, supports running. So if we leave that out on the table, it's like trying to head straight for the peak of Everest. No, there's which angle do you take? Which approach do you take? Because I can guarantee you just heading straight for the goal as hard as you can is a great way to smack your head into a rock.
Absolutely. And to dangle a little offshoot off of your mountain analogy, if you're not listening to Dr. Andy Galpin and Kenny Kane's podcast, The Body of Knowledge, their season 2 is all about Sherpas, in other words, coaches, how to get to the top of the mountain without wrecking yourself along the way. If you haven't listened to it, I'm not in the business of promoting other people's work necessarily, but it's really good, and it's useful for everybody, whether you're a coach or an athlete. So go check that out after you're done listening to this show. I want to cover 2 areas before we kind of get off of the cross-training train, if you will. The first is for endurance athletes, which is the circle I run most often, is CrossFit and endurance. There are some misconceptions about what to use cross-training to accomplish, specifically with regard to strength. In season, I see a lot of cyclists, let's say, who want to do strength work, who want to do barbell work, doing hypertrophy work. They don't necessarily know it's hypertrophy work, but they go in, they do 3 sets of 10 to 12, they do all accessory stuff and, curls and whatever. And then in the off season, they'll do starting strength template, basic stuff, 5x5, whatever. Or flip it. Now, which is the right way? Because I've heard a whole bunch of people argue vehemently in either direction of what kind of strength work you should do in season versus out of season.
So my recommendation on that line has to do with the level of stress that each kind of training is going to introduce. Mm-hmm. So if you are actually doing bodybuilding type work of very strenuous sets of 8 to 12, maybe even up to 20 reps in 5 to 8 exercises, you're stressing out the body. Those are built to maximize hypertrophy. That's what they're designed to do, to build muscle. Brad Schoenfeld has done extensive research on the fact that it seems like volume, total work done, is the biggest driver towards hypertrophy. Those are also incredibly stressful workouts. They're incredibly taxing. And so I wouldn't want to put those in season, because then you increase the risk of interference. You increase the risk of making your aerobic training exercises worse. Mm-hmm. A lot of the adaptations that we're looking for. So when you look at the mechanisms for the adaptations, some of the ones presented, we use the model of like a pedal. So if your leg strength is at 100 units of whatever, and you double it, then each foot stroke is half of what its previous percentage of your max was. So if it takes 5% of your personal strength to press down the pedal on each stroke, now it only takes 2.5% to get each one done. It's a more submaximal, it is an easier effort each time. And that is in the research as a proposed mechanism. There are others that have been proposed, neuromuscular suggestions that for why that adaptation contributes to running. And when you look at those, not many of them have to do with muscle mass, because as soon as you start adding mass, you start getting into, there's certainly a point to which muscle mass helps, but you run into the cost benefit wall of increased mass to move you vice increased mass that you have to carry up a hill on a run. You run into that one a lot faster than the gains that come from strength, the gains that come from the ability to, at the same mass, or to maintain the same ability to exert force. So my recommendation to people is to focus on the attribute of strength. And we do that. Singles tend to be a little bit too taxing. So between 3 and 6 reps, that's why we chose in the starting strength 5, do your 5s. It's relatively simple to follow, to do 3 sets of 5 on an exercise. It builds strength while still not being terribly taxing to execute, and still enabling you to get enough volume and enough reps in a session to practice. It is a lot easier for a runner to do 2 days a week, maybe, like for instance, one program that I have, one of my co-athlete, co-strength and sport athletes on, is a strength or a squat press day, squat press and an accessory movement, and then a deadlift bench and an accessory movement. It's only 2 days a week because their aerobic training volume is quite high. Mm-hmm. But with that, keeping the rep ranges between 3 and 5, they are not nearly taxed going into their aerobic work the next day. They tell me they don't even really feel it because we keep the volume low, but their strength hasn't decreased. In this case, in this particular case, the deadlift seems to have stalled a little bit, and the squat is still going up just a hair, just a little bit. Considering the aerobic training volume that they're putting in during season, I'm okay with that. And that's kind of just the exchange you make. But if you're going to focus on something that's not going to interfere, I would focus on strength and not hypertrophy bodybuilding stuff.
And crucially, know that what you're doing is going to induce, with sufficient volume, is going to induce some kind of hypertrophy anyway. It's a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, much like people make the mistake of thinking there is aerobic work and there is anaerobic work, and ne'er the twain shall meet. You're going to have some hypertrophy in pure strength work, and you're going to have some strength gains from pure hypertrophy work. But if your concern is power to weight ratio, which all endurance athletes are concerned about, rightly so, I'm concerned about it, focus more on that strength work. You might need to do at the end of the season, what I generally prescribe is at the end of your running season or cycling season in November, December, most people kind of roll into that feeling rough, beat up, lost some muscle mass because you're out doing these 6, 8, 10-hour rides, and your body, eats muscle while you do that. So you're going to be missing some things. So for that first cycle or whatever your coach prescribes, get in there and put some of that muscle back on. And then for the rest of your time, until the next off season, work strength progressions, and trust in somebody who has a whole big background in strength stuff to teach you how to do that correctly.
It's that whole idea of the strength bank of muscle mass building over time and holding both for health and for strength. And if you have that to begin with, then it's easier to tolerate its loss. It's easier to handle those heavy training volumes. You have more resilience to lose something than riding that very edge where you're at almost, the minimum capable function, and you're still trying to break that down with more and more miles.
The last thing I wanted to touch on kind of in this cross-training world is sport-specific strength work. And I know there are as many opinions on what the right thing to do is as there are training implements in the gym, but you have expressed in some of your writing some very unique and strong perspectives on this. What is should we be doing sport-specific things in the gym to make me better at tennis or cycling or triathlon?
Short answer, no.
Okay.
The long answer, and it depends on what you mean by sports specific, but because it's sports specific is one of those words like natural or functional that literally everybody who says it has a different meaning.
Right. So let's say the definition we're going to use is, well, I'm a cyclist, and so I need to be able to push very hard with my legs independently. So I'm going to do 3 sets of 50 lunges.
Yeah. And so, and what we end up getting to, what the dynamic correspondence is what the Russian literature calls it, but trying to make your movement in the gym match as closely as possible to your sporting work. You can get as silly as, trying to swing a weighted bat or putting a pulley on the back of a tennis racket and trying to whack with it. And even it begins to, people, it's more sophisticated, it's more modern. To focus instead on unilateral movement or rotational movement or transverse movement because that's what you need to do in your sport. The NSCA textbook will talk about, for instance, the needs analysis. So if you analyze that your lifter needs to be able to push off one leg and move to the right, I've got to find a lift, maybe a split squat that does that. The way I see it, nothing in the gym is close enough to your sport to practice that sport, to specifically build that activity. And the more you try to make it like your sport, the less weight you can put on the bar, so the less you can build the actual specific attribute, or rather the general attribute of strength. So if I switch from a back squat to a Bosu ball, one leg dumbbell squat, because I feel that better mimics my sport, then I'm not really getting very much stronger. The exercise can be hard, but so is juggling a watermelon on a unicycle. Like that doesn't, the effort doesn't make it better for building strength. The stimulus does. So the stimulus becomes ineffective for building strength. And I'm not going to go on, the tennis court and stand on a Bosu ball with a dumbbell in each hand and do a split squat. So it is literally the worst of both worlds to try to make your gym movements like your sporting movements, and how much like? How much is too close? Because there's been some research, for instance, that throwing weighted bats or weighted balls can interfere with the action, at least temporarily, with the thought process and the movement pattern of throwing a normal weighted bat or ball. So instead of trying to find this super fine, perfect line where it's close enough but not close enough, we build a stronger athlete. Mm-hmm. We make you stronger, we make you more powerful, and that strength can contribute to speed later, but we build a bigger frame. And there's really the two core attributes you can develop in the gym, strength and endurance. We build a bigger frame, and then we apply this newer, stronger body to the sport. So if that person, like people throw out the straw man, well, I know this guy, he could bench press 500 pounds, but he was a crappy football player. What are you going to tell me about that? And my answer is, well, of course, because he doesn't play football. Strength does not necessarily make you good at the sport.
Right. It's no replacement for talent.
Exactly. It's no replacement for talent, and it's no replacement for practice. So we give you a better body, throw you on the field, you take this newer, stronger, more powerful body and apply it to the practice of the skills that are going to make you win.
Right.
So instead of your equally strong or your equally skilled placement on the D line going into your opponent and trying to take them down, trying to knock them or pass them through, instead of doing that with X units of strength, 100 units of strength, we double that. We make you stronger. We make you more powerful. Now your opponent who could handle you before is crushed. They can't handle the amount of strength you bring to the same movement.
I think one of the fundamental concepts that's missed when it comes to multimodal training in general is that we should always use the tool for the purpose for which it was designed, right? So the whole point of cross training is not to make you better directly at your sport. It's to improve the machine that plays the sport.
Exactly.
If you're talking about making things sport specific in the wrong way, on a bike, when you're pedaling, your knee never goes past, 120 or 130 degrees of flexion. But that doesn't mean you should only squat to 120 degrees. The whole point of cross training is to correct the things that your sport does badly to your body. In other words, you should squat to full depth. And I'm not even going to debate that with anybody. Squat to full depth. Everything agrees on that. And prevent injury. Again, squat to full depth. There's a whole bunch of literature on why that makes sense. And then give you additional capacity to go do the thing that you're doing as your primary thing. So if your tool is squatting and your sport is cycling, then squat heavy and squat to full depth, because that's going to give you more watts on the bike and make you more resilient in season when you're out there doing hill repeats, and your knees aren't going to hurt as much because they've experienced a full range of motion more often.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think people tend to try to be too literal, I think, with their interpretation of what training in the gym is supposed to transfer over. What about minimum effective dose versus maximum recoverable volume? This is a debate that I see all over the place, just in coaching in general, and especially when it comes to strength sports. Are you a make tiny gains for 5 years kind of guy, or make the most gains you can make without crushing yourself kind of guy?
That window moves over time. The minimum effective dose, I mean, they're obviously valid concepts, because if I can't recover from training, I've exceeded my maximum recoverable volume, I have to go too many days without another stimulus, I lose practice in the movement, there's too many things going on there. And minimal effective dose is apparent. I can't pick up a pencil 5,000 times and get stronger. Like, I can't do pencil curls. It doesn't work that way. You need the stimulus to trigger all the adaptations that we need. In terms of training, let's take a novice. Let's start with a novice, somebody who is coming off the couch and trying to get stronger. It does not take much to make an effective dose. And for novices, it doesn't seem, just from my personal experience, that there is a huge difference between bringing them right to the edge of what they can do and a moderately heavy stimulus that makes the bar slow down. They have to work at it, but not enough that there's any thought that they might possibly fail it. So that's a maximum recoverable volume within a single set, and you can apply that to a same session. Like the difference between putting somebody in and having them do a Karen, I think that's 150 wall balls or something, really crushing them on their first day, by putting them through a 3x5 squat, 3x5 press, 1x5 deadlift at a decent weight. They come out thinking, I could have done more. They wake up the next day sore anyway, because it's their first time doing it, but giving them something manageable. With a novice lifter, I am not trying to go to MRV, because the level of soreness that introduces, the level of damage that introduces, because they're not ready for it, they're not adapted to it, 90% of the time I'm going to lose that lifter. They're just not ready for it. And their minimum effective dose is both more and less than they think. It is more than they think because it is heavier sometimes than they've ever done before. I've worked with people, and it's like you get them in the squat, and they're as they're going down, as they're squatting, they're telling me, oh, this is really heavy. Like this, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can come up. And they're doing reps as they're saying this. every rep, they're pretty sure this rep is going to kill them. So it's more than they think. And on the other hand, it's less than they think, in the sense that they are not going to be as crushed as they think they need to be. We've been convinced that if you aren't thrown on the floor in a puddle and you're having spasms and putting your photos on Instagram, then your training doesn't matter. It's not doing enough if you're not doing that. When you get more towards an intermediate or an advanced lifter, that window between minimum effective dose, let's use a weekly setting, or a weekly measure of total volume, and maximum recoverable volume becomes narrower and narrower and narrower, to the point where they cannot hit beyond a certain point, they cannot hit an effective dose that is going to cause a stimulus continuously. So if they were to hit a dose that causes a training stimulus and gains every week, eventually they'll hit a point when they break, they stall, something happens. Their minimum effective dose has exceeded their maximum recoverable volume. And then they have to start looking at more advanced and therefore complex training setups, where you advance, let's say, from a moderate to a heavy to a supra-maximal dose for that week, something they could not sustain, and then deload. Something like that. And that's just part of the training advancement plan. I think it is silly to say that everyone should be pushing for maximum recoverable volume to get the best gains, or vice versa. Well, everyone should be going for minimum effective dose, because I just want to keep you progressing. I want you to keep growing as an athlete. Both spectrums are to be applied to everyone is irrelevant, because everyone is on a different stage of the training advancement pipeline. In my mindset, I don't even necessarily think in those terms. That's just a way to frame how I train in terms of those two. What my thought process is, how quickly can you adapt to the stimulus and hit the next weight again? So if you can do a 300 by 5 squat and 3 sets of 5 at 300, and then the next week or the next training session, I can put you on 305 and you can hit it. And each time it's going to feel like death. The end of a novice progression kind of feels pretty heavy. Then I'm going to do that until I kind of get the assessment that you're not going to make the next weight, or the next weight's just going to feel too much like death and you're going to give up on me. And then we do it a week later, because we stretch out the training advancement so that now you only make that 5-pound jump in a week after you've had more stimulus, more time to grow. That is my concern. What is the time rate of adaptation, if you want to call it that? When you think in those terms, you're getting as quickly as they can adapt, without, at least until you get to an advanced athlete, without overcomplicating the problem.
You're going to have to overreach at some point. But if you're leaving sweat angels on the gym floor 4 days a week, 5 days a week, you're not going to continue to make progress for very long. And crucially, at that point, if you're pushing yourself that far that often, you're going to start to have problems with mechanics. You're going to start to have problems with, movement, or I should say overuse injuries. There are things to watch out for by going maximum all the time. But that's where the magic comes in, and that's why we get paid as coaches. You mentioned something about 3 paragraphs ago that I wanted to come back to, which is strength for health. There's a huge and growing body of evidence as the baby boomer generation continues to fund most of the science research, that strength is the single biggest predictor of all-cause mortality, and that's been measured a whole bunch of different ways: hamstring strength and grip strength and quadricep strength and all different kinds of strength. But basically, the idea is if you aren't strong enough to keep yourself from falling down the stairs, you're going to.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been playing with is the idea that by the time I'm about 45 or 50, I need to be jacked. So that by the time I'm 80, I still have something left to play with. This flies in the face of everything we've been told about exercise for the elderly, right? It's water aerobics. It's just go out and walk around the neighborhood. Instead, maybe we need to be getting people under a barbell or getting comfortable with a kettlebell or at least moving under their own body weight efficiently. Is this something you've explored with your own clients?
I've seen it explored with a lot of my peer coaches, and I've explored it with some of mine. Most of the people who come to work with me, they're just looking for general health. I'm working with one client right now. He's 67 years old. He's excited about the progress he's made, and we've talked about this before. All he wanted to do was be able to hike comfortably, and to continue to hike because he does mining, he does other things in his spare time. So when I met him, he couldn't press a bar overhead. Right, he couldn't press a 15-pound bar over his head. There were shoulder mechanics and pain issues, and he could not squat the 45-pound bar for a set of 5. So we had to start with a set of 3. And just recently, actually, our most recent session, he got to squatting I think it was 165 pounds for a set of 5, and rack pulls for 205 for a set of 3. Like, the guy has gotten significantly stronger. And one thing that was interesting that happened to him, he was mining and he got crushed by a rock. He was literally, a rock came down from above, hit him. He was saved by another one. He got wedged between the two. A lot of damage to his shoulder, to his chest, to his sternum, his clavicle, and his recovery time was not only faster than it was predicted by the doctors at the time. Also, his time to training was faster than predicted. Because he, in about 4 months, he got back to training, and he has now hit a PR press and a PR press for 67 for a set of 5, and a PR bench for 87 for a set of 5, which for him is a huge deal. And he tells me every day, every time we come into training, the hikes feel easier, the barbell feels lighter, as he works with, anytime he takes a deload, he's like, this weight feels lighter than it did last time. And it is an obvious benefit to his day-to-day life. It's kind of, people forget, they're like, oh, strength it's not really that important until it is. When you don't have, people are like, well, what about balance? We need to train balance. We need to train agility. Well, balance is the ability to keep your weight on the center of your foot, which involves how you control your body mass. So it's great when you can do balance drills under control, but when it is taken out of your control and you slip, you need to take your leg and on a single leg plant, sustain your body's load to hold your center of mass over you. Otherwise, you fall. So all of a sudden, strength becomes balance when you don't have it. Mm-hmm. Strength becomes speed when you don't have it. If you can't squat 45 pounds, or if you can't squat a 15-pound bar, odds are you can't actually get up from a seated position without using your hands. We've met people who end up in this position. We get them down to depth in a squat, and they're shocked to realize that they can't get up without their hands. This has happened over years, and they don't even realize that they've kind of worked around that deficiency. And when you're 70 is not the time to realize that. We want to get people when they're 30, when they're 40, to never get to that point.
Yeah, that's exactly true. And it's not just squatting strength, and it's not just to keep you from falling down the stairs or to catch yourself when you slip on some ice. Bob Takano has done some very interesting work preventing ACL injuries in female volleyball players. And His secret weapon is the split clean. Now, I look like a Gumby when I try to do a split clean because that's a little bit more coordination than I have. But I suppose if you're a 19-year-old volleyball player, you can probably pull that off pretty easy. But it's another illustration of using something for a sport-specific or a life-specific benefit. And I've blown my ACL, dude. It's not fun. It is a bad time, and I don't recommend it to anybody. The rehab was brutal. But you can do things in the gym with barbells that are going to transfer out into the rest of your life and for the rest of your life. One of the more interesting reviews I read was they got a bunch of Bulgarian weightlifters who had been retired for a whole long time, and they got them training again. And these are guys in their 50s and 60s, and they found out that they were able to recover. I forget what the exact number was, but it was a significant percentage of their former strength. And these were internationally competitive guys because of the Bulgarians, and that's what they do. Like 80% of their maximal strength was recoverable in their later years because they had that basis when they were younger.
There's a lot of I say a lot. There's not enough training on or research on the effect of strength training on bone health. But in doing it, it was actually I think it was my first article for Breaking Muscle doing the research for that. In response to claims that, oh, no, there's nothing you can do except for certain medications, and sometimes you're just genetically predisposed to osteoporosis. You're just screwed. Seemed to be the point of that article and that impression. But when you look at the research, there, for instance, a similar case, they took experienced weightlifters, and then 30 years later, when they're now retired and they're older, their bone mineral density was higher than controls. Even then, was it at the level that they were at while they were weightlifting? Of course not. But it was still higher than controls. And they've seen small gains, even in, I think they were 60 plus years old. I would have to check that. But putting them through a training cycle and using sophisticated tools, seeing gains in only 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. So if we can make any, like, people are like, oh, well, that's nothing. When you look at the kind of tools they're having to use to see these gains, it's minuscule. Yeah, but we forget that at 60, you're losing you're losing bone mass.
You're using muscle mass too, yeah.
And muscle mass, yeah, sarcopenia is a thing. So if you even maintain muscle mass and bone mass through strength training, you are beating the game for as long as you can.
Well, and this isn't academic. This is not just trying to make your blood work look better at the doctor, right? We're not chasing your LDL numbers down, although that'll probably happen as you train and as you eat better because you're training. This is quality of life, man. This is getting off the toilet. This is dressing yourself. This is staying out of a nursing home, which to me is the most terrifying place on earth, right? The idea of going in and not being able to take care of my own basic human functions is the loss of dignity, is the loss of quality of life that I want to do everything in my power to avoid.
A coach I know and follow their work closely was working with lifters 80 plus. I mean, these are the most vulnerable population living in a nursing home with certain conditions, and they reflected how much of a life changing moment or experience changing moment it is when one of those lifters was able to open a water bottle, the plastic cap on a water bottle, on their own. We forget that is strength until we can't.
Right.
And then all of a sudden to realize your entire life has shrunk to a point when you have to hit a button and get help to open a water bottle, that happens to some people. And those people need care for, and all those things. Like, that's not anything against them, but any way we can prevent that in our own lives and in those of our family and our friends, we should be doing.
Mm-hmm. It's your strength bank analogy again, right? If you're after 40, somebody's making withdrawals for the rest of your life. Yeah. And if you start out with $100 balance, bro, you ain't gonna make it very far. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me in watching guys like Mark Sisson, who's an absolute animal, like, we don't really know what old age can look like, right? Because 100 years ago, people didn't live that long. And 100 years from now, people who are living that long, who might be taking better care of themselves from a strength and conditioning standpoint, might be really healthy and vital and vibrant into 80 and 90 years old. There's snippets of that now and again. I mean, you'll see like the 80-year-old guy who ran a 3:30 marathon or whatever. Like, there's glimpses of it, but if we're careful, if we can overcome a lot of other societal things, we might find out that being elderly doesn't have to coincide with being frail. And to me, that's exciting.
And even if, to me, you throw out that analogy, and I can almost hear, people that I know, that's over the top. He's a genetic freak or something like that. You don't have to be a 3:30 marathon runner at 80 years old to not be frail.
Right.
And there are enough people who are frail. Like, the bar is actually, it is, again, higher and lower than we think. It is lower than we think in terms of what strength training requires, but it is higher than we think because most people walk around assuming that the way they're at right now, and it's not even something we think about, until we go to a seminar, or we're told by somebody, or our doctor hands us our blood lipid profile. We don't even think about how we're going to be in 5 years. We don't. It's that you don't see yourself changing in the mirror one day after the other until you look back and go, oh.
Yeah, and the other misconception we have that is just now, I would say in the last 10 years, starting to be dispelled is, what is the female body capable of doing, right? All of a sudden, you've got girls like Steffi Cohen out there deadlifting refrigerators for reps, like all the time. And for forever, for basically most of Western history, it's been, oh, well, women are the physically weaker of the species. And while that may end up being true, we don't know what that percentage is. Like, where do you see this going as more and more, we get more data, right? More and more women start training for strength, more and more women start getting into things like CrossFit and powerlifting and weightlifting. Do we even have any idea where the ceiling is?
I don't think we have an idea what the ceiling is for really anything, and that includes although obviously we more asymptotic approach for men, we've gotten closer than we have for women because the sample size has been smaller. I don't think we've seen the ceiling for any of it yet. I actually think the CrossFit Games is a good sampling at the moment for what that gap is and where those capabilities are. The gap will narrow. I don't think it'll ever quite meet. The more I look into the research, the neuromuscular differences appear to be at some level innate, but there is a level to which strength is a byproduct of the things we do, and the things we do are affected by how much of our social construct we've taken on board, how much we've taken on board people telling us you won't be strong, and of course the body that you're given in which to do it. And I think that first half is going to close tighter and tighter and tighter. It's when it's when I see people, women who can do 20, 25, 30 pull-ups, and other peers of mine, other people that I know who are not in the strength training community, they look at that and they're like, that's not even possible. I love it and I hate it when people go, well, they have to be on steroids. They have to be on steroids. That's not even possible. I was told that because I could pick up my wife. And that goes to show it goes to show the level of ignorance about the difference in actual capability if you haven't gone through the process of training and growing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know. And what we're finding out, and this is a field that I'm not qualified to speak on necessarily, but it's one I like to watch, is the difference between genetics and epigenetics, right? Which is the difference between the cards you're dealt and how you play them, to put it very, very simply. And obviously there's a lot more that goes into that, but we don't know yet. A baby comes out of the womb with a certain set of genetics, but what we do with that physical and mental organism in the meantime can mean every sort of difference in the world, as far as what they grow up to be and how tall they grow up to be and how strong, whatever. Yeah. And we don't know yet. We're just starting to dabble in that stuff. And to me, that's the next great frontier in human performance, is finding out how those genes can actually express over time. It's
exciting.
We've kind of danced around a little bit, but let's back up for people who may not know what we're talking about. Beyond the sets of 5, what is starting strength?
So, if you type in starting strength in a Google search bar, 90% of the time what you are, or if you're not familiar, if you come across it on a forum or you ask the question, people are probably going to tell you, oh yeah, it's that program. You look on, you type in a Google image search and you'll see squat 3x5, bench 3x5, deadlift 1x5, squat 3x5, press 3x5, power clean 5x3. And so it has been, this program is meant for novices and people who are just starting, and it's almost like a lot of people have the thought that this is like the couch to 5K sort of approach, and that this is starting strength. Like, so I'm going to do it and then I can't do it anymore. Starting strength is done. What starting strength is, and it has always been these pieces, but it has evolved over time. There's a couple pieces to it. On that programming side, it's a paradigm. It's what we were talking about earlier about approaching somebody. Can they advance today? Can they advance the next session, the next week, over month timescales? And taking that concept of training, that perspective on training, focusing on the key movements for as long as we can, keeping it simple for as long as we can, and making it more complex as we need to advance the lifter. That is our basic programming, and I'm super simplifying it, but that's the basic programming paradigm. written in the book Practical Programming for Strength Training, and also for older lifters, the book The Barbell Prescription by Andy Baker and Dr. Jonathan Sullivan. And because we forget that as people begin to be unable to recover, then their advancement looks very different. One thing I tell people is like, look, I see starting strength. I know you've seen the program. Understand that I have a 67-year-old lifter who trains 2 times a week, and he does not do 3x5s on all of his lifts all the time. He does not do power cleans. He's 67. What's his business doing power cleans? He can't actually get into the position, but he is still doing starting strength by the paradigm. Mm-hmm. Another piece to it is how we move. So unfortunately, there is an element to coaching. There's an art and a science to coaching. A lot of coaches, if they truly care about it, it is almost entirely art. So they have looked at thousands upon thousands of squats. Mm-hmm. And there is a feedback cycle that said, well, that one was heavy and they got it up, so they did something good. Mm-hmm. And when you compile all these together into a database in a coach's brain, they can get pretty good at diagnosing a squat and giving advice on what that squat should look like. For us, that's not enough. We want to know how the squat works and how the mechanics of that movement work. For instance, the deadlift is the easiest example. If the bar is not over the midfoot and the weight is maximal, the bar is not coming off the floor. Mm-hmm. And there are various reasons that go into that based on the mechanics of how the arm hangs down, a bunch of other things. But we care because then we have to apply that to the lifter we're looking at. So if it doesn't look like that, are they doing it wrong? Are they doing an exception for some reason? Or is our model wrong? Because if the model is wrong, if we are wrong in how a deadlift should look, one thing we hear all the time is get on your heels, get on your heels. Like it activates the posterior chain to be back on your heels. According to the model, as we look at it, the combined center of mass of everything has to be over the middle of the foot, or else you're out of balance and you're wasting energy just to stand, let alone to actually get a squat out of the hole. So you shouldn't be on your toes, but you shouldn't be on your heels either. You should be on the middle of the foot, driving through the whole lift. So when we coach, we are looking for that. That is one of the things we're looking at. And if the model is wrong, then we need to change our coaching. And vice versa, if the model is right, we can't hold on to get back on the heels. Mm-hmm. It might be an overcue. It might be something like that, but it can't be something that we actually believe as coaches. That's the science. There's the art science, there's the mechanics of coaching. Mm-hmm. Something that we hashtag barbell nerds, we care about a lot. And then the last piece of it is how we coach. For us, does the lifter look the way we want them to according to the model? Do they get better? So if I give a cue and the next lift, let's say, I'm cueing a power clean. The next lift doesn't go up, but the lift looks better. Was the cue effective? In our answer, yes. Because the goal is to, in the long term, we're convinced that cue that conforming to the model will make it easier and get that power clean up. Mm-hmm. They may have just fatigued, and we need to apply that as coaches. Or we have to step back and step the humility to go, is my understanding wrong? Mm-hmm. So these 3 different pieces, how do we train them over time? How should they look in the movement? How do the lifts actually work in a system of gravity and all the things that we can't get rid of, even though we might want to. Mm-hmm. And then the cues and the things that we say as coaches, that's all a piece of what it is that we do as starting strength coaches.
I think that's a really important point to hammer home, both for coaches and for athletes, is that no cue is universally applicable and no cue is permanent. Right? I mean, I have been coached to be on my heels, and I made the mistake of over applying that cue to too many things until finally I was having problems with my deadlift, and my coach just walked past and casually was like, hey, use your whole foot. That's all he said. Just use your whole foot. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, that's way better.
Yeah.
It completely changed the lift for me. And another one, a cue that I've used in the past on squats is pick your eyes up. People are pitching forward on their squats. Now, I don't want people looking at the ceiling and craning their neck and doing that, but for specific populations, for specific types of squatters, I want them to pick their eyes up a little bit because it's going to lead their upper body up and stop them from pitching forward onto their toes and doing other bad things in the lift. But it's specific to that person. We tend to squat high bar in CrossFit, so it's specific to that type of squat. I can't apply that to everything. I'm never going to tell a competitive powerlifter to pick his eyes up because he's not squatting that way, you know?
There's so many, like, it coaching, like, some people oversimplify it and some people underestimate it. You can get the point where you think, oh, squatting, it's just sitting up and, sitting down and standing up. You've been doing it forever. You've squat on the toilet all the time, right? Throw a 300-pound bar on your back and it's not the same thing.
Nope.
On the other hand, people can overcomplicate it. You need you need to be a physical therapist and have an understanding of the fascial trains and how many chakras are pointing to your kundalini. Like, I don't even know, in order to tell somebody that they need to stand up in the squat, like they need to actually finish the rep. What we want to know, what we're trying to avoid, is what I call heuristics. So a heuristic just being a shortcut for a valid thing. So if you have built in your mind from years and years and years of coaching one particular type of lifter, that chest up, that a higher chest squat is a more mature squat, and that all I need to do is to get them to get their chest up and it'll fix everything. And all the things that come from that, the reliance on goblet squats for training, all that kind of stuff. If my heuristic is chest up equals good, can you have a lifter whose chest is up too high?
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. For us, we actually tell people to get their chest down. Most of the lifters we work with start off trying to be too high. So they're in a bad position when they hit the hole, and when they try to come out, then their hips pop up in order to get the drive that they need to get out of the hole. It's just a messy thing, and it limits how much weight they can lift. So we're trying to tell them to get their chest down. On the other hand, it is possible to go down too far. The goal of a coach is not to figure out what is the perfect cue. It's to understand how the lifter should look and then get them there. Some people are too forward. Some people are too back. Some people, the bar is rolled forward of the foot. Some people, it's in the deadlift. Some people, it's way too close to the shin and they're doing a stiff-legged deadlift. If you say a cue, and I could not find a lifter who you shouldn't say that cue to, it's wrong. Like, if that cue would apply to every lifter you ever look at under all circumstances, I'm using a universal here, but I'm pretty sure that with a better understanding of the model, I could find you a lifter to whom I may be like, no.
Flat back in a deadlift is another one, or arch your back in a deadlift is used a lot. And yeah, arch your back in a deadlift unless you've already got a lordotic, lower spine, and then don't arch your back any further than it already arches naturally in the deadlift. I've
seen people with hypermobility who can get into gnarly levels of extension in a deadlift that limits the amount of weight that they can pick up. Mm-hmm. And they've been told that arching your back, oh wow, you're so impressive, you can arch your back so well, then they hold off on increasing the weight from 35 pounds. Mm-hmm. They lift more in the groceries, but now they're scared because they've been told, oh, your arch is perfect in this incredibly hyperextended position. Mm-hmm. And take, for instance, like lifters like Eddie Hall. Eddie Hall pulled 500 kilograms. Yep. His shoulders are rounded at the front of the movement. Mm-hmm. We tell people, keep a flat upper back too. So when your upper and lower back flat in the movement, well, why is Eddie Hall getting away with it and we're not? Well, if we don't understand the model and how it works, then he looks like some kind of freak genetic exception, or you treat him as a rule. Well, Eddie Hall did it. He's got the strongest deadlift in the world, so everyone should be doing it that way. With a better understanding of the model as a coach, you can get a picture for why he chooses to do that and why you may or may not choose to do that yourself or with your lifter or whatever.
Let's hammer out a few quick ones, and then we'll leave starting strength and close out. Why low bar squats and not high bar squats?
So the low bar squat, we go back to that whole concept earlier. We're trying to build the machine. Mm-hmm. To build the machine, to get stronger, we want to be able to put more weight on the bar for as long as we can. Mm-hmm. It is known, but yeah, Game of Thrones fan. But low bar squats, almost universally, unless you have been extensively training in the high bar squat and are so uncomfortable or bad form in the low bar squat that you don't do it correctly, mm-hmm. you can low bar squat more than you can high bar squat. Mm-hmm. My hypothesis on this one is that the quads tend to be overworked, or that they tend to be the limiting factor in a high bar squat. By switching to the low bar, the bar shifted about 2 inches down in the back. You're lean forward a little bit more. Your hip moment arm, so your hips move back farther, so they're able to lift more weight. You get more ass into the movement,
Mhm.
and the knees come a little bit closer back. It's a small difference, but virtually every power lifter who has done both and practiced both can tell you, I know my difference is about 7% between my high bar and my low bar squat. It just is.
Mhm.
So since we're trying to build a machine, we want you to be able to lift more weight
Mhm.
for a longer period of time on the progression to apply more stress to more muscle mass over the greatest effective range of motion. And if you can get in a low bar squat, your hips below your knees, that to us is the point at which you're effective. Because if you go beyond that, you actually have to bring the hips closer to the bar. You have to shorten that moment arm, and then it becomes the stunt, the practice of how do you get those hips back into place before you drive up again. You see it in every Olympic lifter when they're going for a 1 RM attempt.
Mhm.
They drop their hips to the floor because they have to
Mhm.
in order to get under the bar fast enough. But before they come up, their hips will swoop up and back
Mhm.
to get into what looks very often, especially in the snatch, like the low bar squat position, the back angle that we get to.
Mhm.
That's why we do low bar. It doesn't mean we do low bar all the time. When I coach my lifters, my 67-year-old lifter that I was talking about, the minor, his shoulders can't take low bar. They are they literally can't get into the position. I'm not going to make him do low bar. A squat's a squat. He'll
Right.
get stronger. He'll get stronger doing a squat anyway. And there are other reasons why somebody might not low bar. But unless I can identify what that reason is, then I want them lifting more weight.
Next one. 1x5 deadlift does not seem like a lot of deadlifts, man. I don't know what kind of progress I'm going to make on one set of 5 deadlifts. Why? What makes you think that you can make me strong on 5 reps of deadlift?
1x5 deadlifts comes after 3x5 squats on the same day. And people forget that, they thought, 1x5, that's not a. I've had people on both sides. I've had people, it's because YouTube is a cesspool of ridiculousness in the comments. I've had people tell me, you can't squat and deadlift on the same day. You'll break your spine, you'll shear, like you'll ruin yourself. And then on the other hand, people telling me that 1x5 deadlift isn't enough volume.
Mhm.
After the 3x5 squat, the movements are not the same, and you can generally lift more with the deadlift. But after the 3x5 squat, the combined stimulus of the deadlift tends to be more than most people, or as much as most people need, once they actually start lifting heavy. So at the beginning of the program, a novice, it doesn't feel too bad. It doesn't feel terribly heavy
Mhm.
to go through the program as it is. But then days progress. Once it starts getting heavy, people don't complain that it's only one set of 5. They're
Well, and
wishing
you
it's
don't
like 2
just
sets of 3.
yeah, and you don't just roll up to a bar loaded with your 80% and pull it 5 times. You probably
Also that.
progress into that, and you're getting more reps than 5, but it's 1x5 working set. It's not,
Exactly.
yeah. So if you're pulling 4 or 5 off the floor, you don't come off of your squats and then just walk over and pull it 5 times and then waltz out of the gym. You also should put your weights away, you dirty bastard.
I hate
But,
you.
that guy. The last one I want to cover kind of in this area, you've run the gamut of some of the main certifications that people look at, right? You've been CrossFit L1, you've trained in CrossFit gyms, you've done USA weightlifting. Why has starting strength turned into your primary focus as you've become a more mature coach?
For a couple of reasons. So first off, it's the system, in the sense that I am convinced, and this is again #barbell nerd, but I'm convinced it is the closest to an accurate understanding of how we work of the rest. And the better I get at understanding and applying that to my lifters, the better they get at lifting, and the quicker I get at fixing their problems in a way that, for all the value I got, from the value I got from the other different certifications, it has not transferred in quite that same way. The second reason was the starting strength, that base of knowledge, that moment model, and the level of training I had to do to get the certification. Because the certification, there's a platform test. They measure your ability to coach a lifter in real time at a seminar through all 5 of our major lifts: squat, bench, deadlift, press, and power clean. So, and then you have to complete a written exam. So by the time, assuming you get past the platform, the process of developing the skill to get through that cert made me, or brought the skill set that I brought to CrossFit 760, that I have brought to various other coaching enterprises and skills that have made me a more valuable and useful coach. It is a general understanding of human movement that I was looking for, and although it's not complete, I'm still improving as a coach. It's the best that I've seen yet. And then the last reason is the community. The community, the other starting strength coaches have been fantastic, both as mentors, as peers, as people to work with and for. I really couldn't look for a better core of for a small group of us. I think there's only like 120 or 130 of us right now.
Oh wow! Okay.
I could not look for a better core of people to work with and communicate with. I also do starting strength online coaching, and we all have a Slack channel that we're talking back and forth about lifting, about our experiences and our what we need to do as coaches. Mm-hmm. And the level of knowledge I've just got from being exposed to the PTs in the group, the doctors, the other coaches who have been doing this for years is phenomenal. I just haven't seen a mentoring group or been exposed to one in my years in the Navy at any point that has provided me as much as that community, which is pretty much those are the reasons why it's become, as a coach, the model that I go by.
I think that's a pretty strong endorsement, especially the community aspect, having come out of years of active duty military service, that you found a stronger and more supportive community. What you're doing now with starting strength than you've experienced before. CJ, this has been a ton of fun. Last thing before we let you go and get back to making people freakishly strong, what are you working on this year, man? You still got things to pull off the ground and stand them up off of things, and what are you doing?
Yeah. So for me personally, my goal is and has been a 1,400 total. So I have been working up to a body weight that I think I can get that at. I have gone in the last year from 165 to working to 200 pounds.
Wow.
And yeah, that's been fun. And working towards that 1,400 total. As a coach, expanding in CrossFit 760, as well as, like CrossFit 760 has expanded, covering multiple gyms in Nevada now, as well as here in SoCal and one in Oklahoma. So contributing more to that and providing and learning more as a coach, as well as through the starting strength community. So there's the coaches conference and the science panel we did last year, doing that again on a different topic. All these things are rolling down the pipe.
Good stuff. Where should people go online to follow your exploits and your research and your barbell nerddom? So,
Breaking Muscle, obviously. Articles on Breaking Muscle. Those will be coming again. I know. So my Facebook page, Christian Gotcher, and my Instagram is at Fare Forward Training, FARE Forward Training, from the Dry Salvages by T.S. Eliot. That's where that's from. But nice. Yeah, those are really the three places you can reach me.
Awesome. CJ, thank you for your time. This has been a heck of a great show, and I can't wait to get it out to our audience. We'll have to get you on again to talk about how big a fan you are of Food Babe and Tom Brady. We'll talk again in coming months, and you have yourself a great week.
Take care. You too.